Hello and welcome to this special edition of the AppDevANGLE. My name is Paul Nashawaty. I'm the practice lead and principal analyst for the AppDev practice. I'm joined here by Ally Gentry. Ally, how you doing?
Doing well, Paul. How are you?
Great to have you on. I'm doing awesome. Thank you. So, hey, why don't you introduce yourself to the audience and let people know who you are?
Yeah, so my name is Ally Gentry. I work at ECI Research and I focus on application development.
Awesome. Well, Ally, we're here to talk about Open Community Experience. It was a crazy, incredible event. Unfortunately, I was not able to make it there live, but I did cover the event. You were there live. I want to get your perspective of what was happening. This was an event, Open Community Experience. If people are not familiar with it, it's really where developers and architects and maintainers for open source really come together and they meet and they talk about global experiences and sponsored by the Eclipse Foundation. This is a community that was brought into Brussels for this event, and it was a 3-day technical session for hands-on, real-life kind of training, and really collaborating to understand the workflow and ideas around what was going on. You know, Ally, some of the things that I was really excited about when I was going through the keynote was, you know, it was what you would expect, right? There was open source as a strategic sovereignty was an area. Sovereignty is we're in Europe. It was definitely an area of concentration. Data spaces moving from theory to infrastructure was really a big focus. Of course, the EU CRA compliance was definitely top of mind. You know, again, being in Europe, but also it is coming to a focus point here. And then, you know, Java and Jakarta EE, you know, it really was a big focus in that, you know, for the event. But, you know, I think that a couple of other things that really stood out in my mind was like IoT embedded, ThreadX, you know, that was gaining momentum. And then the big thing of the week, from what I understood, was trust. But I wasn't there. You were there. I'd love to get the feet, you know, the feet on the street view. What was your thoughts?
Absolutely. I would agree with everything you said. I think that one of the biggest things that I saw there is that open source is kind of shifting from something that's a developer preference to a strategic infrastructure. So I think for a while, open source was kind of framed as a tooling choice or an engineering philosophy. But at OCX, it was clear that the conversation is shifting. So it's being discussed now and there, especially as a critical infrastructure that's deeply tied to sovereignty, resilience, long-term control, and like you mentioned, trust. Trust was huge there. It was the big focus of conversation. So I think now organizations are not just asking, is this a good developer tool, but they're asking things like who controls the platform? Can we inspect it? Can we move it if needed? And can it survive regulatory and geopolitical shifts? So this is where open source kind of becomes more than code. It's becoming leverage for a lot of these organizations.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think that in order to accelerate what we're seeing in the CI/CD pipeline, especially when we talk about governance, compliance, and regulations, moving infrastructure to code is important for delivery. The days of, you know, putting a help desk ticket and waiting 3 days for something to change are long since gone. So when we see like 2026 is really being the year of open source officially entering the boardroom conversations, it's true, it's happening. It's not just you know, kind of buzz in the background. It's actually real and moving forward. And that was very much top of mind from the sessions that I was seeing. You know, I do think that this also aligns very closely to our research. We were finding that organizations are driving towards that focus around infrastructure as code and delivering for automation across their delivery. But the key here is maturity. Organizations need to understand where they live in their own maturity cycle and then how they're going to drive. So let's shift to you know, another area that was very much top of mind, Ally, which was, you know, Europe is turning regulations into competitive advantage, and the CRA, or the Cyber Resiliency Act, was top of mind. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, CRA was not just a buzzword, but it was very much central to the whole event. So, you know, talking about the act, spaces, digital sovereignty, they were very practical business conversations that took place in Europe. So I think what stands out is that Europe specifically seems to try to be operationalizing trust. So talking about secure software supply chains, reusable compliance frameworks, governed data collaboration, transparent digital ecosystems. All of this Europe is focusing on to create frameworks where organizations can collaborate with data and also preserve governance, privacy, and control. So that could become, I think, really important in the AI era. So where trusted access to data may be more valuable than raw model size. So that was a really big conversation there.
Yeah, and I also think that it shows practical, deployments for development, and it also shows importance, right? Because like there's a level of accountability that organizations have to run into. Plus, there's some stiff fines if you don't comply to these regulations. And too often, compliance is framed as a legal or procurement issue, and it really does impact the CI/CD pipeline and the SDLC. So I think it's important to understand that. But CRA changes that really dynamically. It's pushing for accountability deeper into the engineering process and software supply chains, as well as disclosure models, especially when we start looking at AI and looking at lifecycle management. But basically, in short, what we're seeing is compliance is now moving upstream. And that. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. So was that like a top of mind theme? Because that to me was definitely from the keynotes and from the sessions I was seeing as like very much as a top of mind.
Yeah, so I think that it's shifting from something that's kind of an afterthought that you do kind of at the end of the whole process. It is shifting upstream to become embedded in all parts of the life cycle. So I think one of the quotes that really stood out to me was a quote from John Ellis, and he said, "Would you sleep under the software that you built?" So when he was talking about this, he was talking about the context of obviously construction and trusting the infrastructure that you build, sleeping under the bridge that you built, and applying that to software that you're building and that you're deploying. That's kind of the mindset shift here. It's reframing quality in human terms. So not just sprint velocity, not just feature output, but actual real trust. So again, as AI gets embedded into physical systems, this is becoming a lot more urgent. We might be heading towards a world where software engineering starts borrowing more aerospace and industrial discipline over consumer app culture.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it also was very clear to me when we look at the not just pitching something over the fence. Like historically, what we saw was development was very much siloed into isolation, where we had individual silos. The CI/CD pipeline was siloed, and you developers will create something and then pitch it over to the next part. So day zero would build it, release would then get it, and then operations would then get it. And the two in the different categories would never talk to each other. That is definitely something that's clear. It's definitely was obvious it was clearing up. So we saw that future of software isn't just about apps; it's about physical systems. But let's before we get there, I think the other big kind of takeaway that I was looking at was the Java and Jakarta EE. That was really a big focus point too at OCX, right? It reinforced that enterprises are already knowing the foundational platforms. It still matters, right? Understanding the underlying code. A lot of organizations, what I was watching at here, it was the theme was people are chasing headlines, right? For, putting newest frameworks and autopilots in place and AI autopilots in place. But really it comes down to critical systems across, whether it's banking, government, manufacturing, telecom, they still run on mature, trusted stacks. And that's where, the Java and Jakarta kind of play kind of came into effect here. So I thought that was something that we also was really something that was really focused on as well. But then we got into, IoT and embedded ThreatX and how it was gaining momentum. So why don't you talk a little bit about that? Because I think that was a big area where the physical systems it's not just about one part of it or another. I used to joke around saying that infrastructure is just a plumbing, but it really does come down to the entire tech stack to make it work.
Yeah, absolutely. So I had a great talk with Frederick Despians at the Eclipse Foundation, and we kind of dove deep into this. One of the most underrated themes, I think, at OCX was embedded systems, ThreatX, RISC-V, software-defined vehicles, industrial platforms, all of these real-world systems becoming software controlled. So that changes a lot of the conversation. So when software is running things like cars, factories, hospitals, the standards go, I think, way up. So suddenly, quality, certification, safety, and lifecycle management are mattering again in a different way. And so the conversation that I had with Frederick really kind of honed in on the connection and the importance of the connection between software and hardware and how we look at that as it develops.
Yeah, I mean, definitely was a theme that was it was front and center during the keynotes and during the sessions. Ally, great event. Final thoughts. What do you think? What are your key takeaways?
Yeah, truly an amazing experience. I am deeply appreciative of everyone at the Eclipse Foundation for creating and putting on such a great event that really fostered collaboration, open talks. In the midst of open source discussions. But yeah, it was absolutely amazing. And I can't wait to see what they'll do next year.
Absolutely. I think I'm looking forward to it as well. And thank you to the Eclipse Foundation for pulling this together. OCX may not have been the loudest event on the, that was out there, but it was definitely one of the ones that was very important to kind of not brush under the covers. It was all the topics and all the things that we talked about here in this summary, but also the event itself. I encourage the audience to go back and look at it. The Eclipse Foundation has really positioned itself to be the intersection of open source and governance and enterprise operations, as well as regulatory readiness, industrial platforms, and the next generation of developer ecosystems. So it's important for organizations to understand this as well when you look at things like the new EU CRA, or as you're maturing your own organizations. And of course, this little thing called AI that everybody's looking at. But this is definitely a great event. I really enjoyed the coverage of it. Ally, thank you for being there. And thank you all for watching. But for now, this wraps up this episode of the special edition of the AppDevANGLE. Thank you for watching, and make sure you tune in next week for another episode. Thank you.